This story is written in third person narrative. We have omniscient writer here. This is in first person narrative. These are actually, the words, the phrases which you find in different kind of contexts. Now, in this video, I'm going to discuss points of view, the technique of narration, whether the technique is in first person narrative or second person narrative or third person narrative. I'll also take some examples in order to explain my points to you. So let us now start it. So let us now discuss today a very important topic: narrative technique. We call it sometimes point of view, which in abbreviated form called POV. Now, when we study a novel or a short story, we find that a novel or a short story has some important elements, and this narrative technique is also one of the important elements. Now, when you look at the word narrative, it is from a Latin word, and the English meaning of that Latin word is to tell. Now, in a story or in a novel, the narration is very important, telling is very important. How a story is told to us is very important. And this is important for an author, that if he wants to have a good narrative, he has to select the incidents very carefully and create some connections between series of events. What basically narrative is, it is made up of some dramatized incidents, descriptions of people and places, dialogue, reporting of past events, ponderings of the author or one of the characters, and commentaries on society. And now comes the role of the narrator. It is the narrator who joins and weaves and blends all these things together. When we read a story, our attention is focused by the narrator's manner of presenting the story, the way he is presenting the story to us. And this manner of presenting the story to us is known as point of view. What is basically point of view? Point of view refers to who is telling or narrating a story. Now, a story can be told to us from the perspective of the first person, or second person, or third person point of view. And narrative becomes, or narrative is called, as per the point of view of the narrator. So there are basically three kinds of, narrative, or three kinds of, points of view. So we have first person point of view or narrative. We have second person, and then we have third person. These are the three narratives, the 3 points of view. Okay. Now, what happens, say, in the first person narrative or the first person point of view? The author in the first person narrative is a participant in the events. He is a participant in the events. In the second person, the author addresses the audience. And in the third person, neither the author nor the audience are participants in the events narrated. Let me take one example. If I say, for example, that I read this book, if I am narrating a story where I am using this sentence, I read this book, it seemed to me very interesting. I, me, first person. Then, similarly, if you are saying, you read this book, I think, which you must have liked, second person. Or if I say, Shambhavi and Gita read this book, third person. Depending, on the kind of pronoun we are using. So, you see, in the first person point of view, or in the first person narrative, the subjective I, we are dominant. Objective me and us are dominant. Possessive my, mine, our are dominant. And reflexive myself, ourself are dominant. So when we read a first person point of view, or when we read a first person narrative, or when we read a story where first person is dominant, we'll have I, we, me, us, my, mine, our, myself, ourself. And if we have second person point of view, in the case of subjective, you will have you, objective you, possessive your, yours, or reflexive yourself or yourselves. You will have the use of these pronouns. In the third person narrative, we'll have, for example, he, she, it, they as subjective. In objective, we'll have him, her, hers, its, etc. In possessive, we'll have, say, her, hers. In reflexive, we'll have himself, herself, themselves, etc. So if we have the dominance of these pronouns, we'll have that kind of, narrative. I have just told you that basically we are having three types of, point of view. But I'll tell you that, not three, but there are four types of point of view, because third is divided into two parts. So when we say first person point of view or the first person narrative, so it is in this narrative, we'll have, as I told you, the dominance of, personal pronoun I, my, me, us. Because here a narrative is told from a first person perspective. From first person perspective. The author here tells the story through a character who refers to herself or himself as I, because I have told you we'll have I here. And this person is generally a character in that particular work. A famous work, for example, if you take this work, Moby Dick by Herman Melville will have this first person narrative. Or you take Wuthering Heights by Emily Bronte. So many passages where this point of view is, adopted. If we come to second person narrative or the second person point of view, as I told you in the beginning, that in the second person narrative, the narrator addresses the protagonist or another important character by the second person. Second person means you or your. This second person narrative is not very common in literature. We have generally, first person or, third person narrative. The second person is very, it is extremely rare. We have one example of a French novel called, Second Thoughts. It's a French novel which was published in 1957, written by Michael Booter. It is from the second person, point of view. Third person point of view, which is, very common in literature. In a third person point of view, in a third person narrative, the narrator refers to the characters, as I told in the beginning, as he, she, they, or by name. In other words, the narrator is not a character. You can take the novel 1984 by George Orwell. It's a novel by George Orwell. And there you'll find out this kind of, narrative. Or if you read the novels of Jane Austen, a famous romantic novelist, there are good examples of, third person narrative. Now, this third person narrative is divided into two parts. We have third person omniscient narrator or omniscient point of view. And then we have third person limited point of view. As the name suggests, the third person omniscient narrator assumes a vantage point and is not only able to recount the action thoroughly and reliably, but is also able to enter the mind of any character in order to reveal his or her thoughts. If you read the novels of Leo Tolstoy, especially War and Peace, then you'll find out that the narrator not only narrates about a particular character, but he enters into the mind of other characters also. And this third person limited point of view, in this, the author using this point of view recounts the story through the eyes of a single character or few of his characters and presents the story as seen from their point of view. In this mode of storytelling, we usually learn a great deal, about the private history and thoughts of one character in the story. And that is why Henry James, who gave the term stream of consciousness, He called, such a character the focus or the center of consciousness. He used this word for such kind of characters. This limited point of view, which I'm talking about, gradually developed later on into the 20th century into the sophisticated stream of consciousness technique. So, what you have learnt here in this lecture, I told you about narrative technique, what basically narrative technique is. I told you about points of view, that what is points of view, and it is like POV. I told you the Latin word. I told you there are three kinds of points of view: first person, second person, and third person. And when you are going to judge what kind of point of view or what kind of narrative is there, so if it is first person, in the subjective form we'll have I and we. In the objective form we'll have me, us. Similarly, we'll have a reflexive pronoun. In second person and third person, I told you we'll have the presence of all these pronouns. I explained the first person narrative where I gave the example of Moby Dick and also Emily Bronte's Wuthering Heights. About second person point of view, I gave you the example of Second Thoughts, a French novel by Michael Booter. Though this second person point of view is very rarely found. Third person point of view, which is very common, I gave the example of George Orwell's novel 1984 and also the novels of Jane Austen. Then I explained the third person point of view has two parts, is of two kinds. One is third person omniscient narrator and third person limited point of view. As the word omniscient means all knowing, so I explained the term third person, omniscient narrator, that he enters into the mind of any character in order to reveal his or her thoughts because he knows everything. And I gave you the example of Leo Tolstoy's War and Peace. And then I explained that this limited point of view, and I gave you the example of Henry James also, how he calls it the focus of consciousness, and how this kind of novel later on developed into stream of conscious novel. This much for this lecture. Thank you very much.